Welcome everybody to the Sales Hacker webinar, Sales Managers and Sales Enablement, Strengthening the Connection. This is an amazing conversation. I've looked at the slides, I've talked to Alex, and it's Alex Laats. Did I do that right, Alex?
Yes, you did, Richard. Thank you.
All right. And he's Estonian. For those who are interested in the pronunciation, that's where it comes from. He's been an entrepreneur since the late 90s, survived the first dot bomb along with me, although he's got better hair than I do. So Alex, welcome to the webinar, and thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, of course. Really happy to be here, and thanks everybody for attending. Hopefully we'll make it worth your while.
Yeah, so just for some context, right, because I think people do want to be human about this stuff. How's Brainshark doing with all this stuff? Or you guys had to make some adjustments and stuff internally?
Yeah, I think we're in Boston. We're in the Boston area. So like so many businesses, we've followed the lead and tried to provide some leadership. I think tech is really leading the way in a lot of ways. We early on started with a work from home program in order to help our employees, make sure that everything was kind of safe in their worlds. Yeah. And then our technology really enables remote training, and remote onboarding. And so with so many things being, in flux, we're looking for ways to help with that technology. Haven't quite figured it out, but I think we'll have some offers that will be able to help our customers, and so that we can do our part.
Yeah, and I'll say this: nobody knows the answer to this, yeah. Right? We're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to help each other and be supportive. I'm doing it. I know you guys are doing it. The nice thing is that this technology even exists, right? This is even a possibility. 10 years ago, this would have been much harder. So very grateful for companies like Brainshark being able to do this and provide some things. For the folks listening, please go into the chat section, introduce yourself, name your company if you want, how big your team is, if you're having people work remote. We're doing this more to share. We're not trying to create leads or anything off this. We're just trying to support each other, be supportive of one another. If you have questions, please bring them along throughout the webinar. We don't want to we will do Q&A at the end, but we also know sometimes those questions are really relevant right in that moment. And so we certainly want to let people do that. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. With that being said, I'm going to sort of mute out. I'll be here, maybe jump in for a question here and there, but I'm going to really turn this over to Alex, and we're going to go from there and let him run the show. So Alex, go for it. Or Alex, sorry.
No, that's right. Alex is right. All right. So thanks, everybody. So let's dive into this. I'm going to make sure I can click the screen here, click too far. So the agenda that we're going to cover is, what do we really mean about the sales management and sales enablement connection? Why is this a relevant topic now? Why is there a connection in the first place? And why is it a natural one? And then we're going to talk about where it breaks down. Because I think, in our prior conversation, Richard was sharing with me, a lot of times from the sales management perspective, the question is, when I'm in crunch time, how is sales enablement really going to help me? Or when I'm planning my quarter, am I planning my year? How's sales enablement really going to help me? And so we'll dive into that because I think that's really the essence of how we strengthen the connection and where things break down. We're going to get into kind of the weeds in terms of how to strengthen the connection. We're going to specifically talk about how we can translate quota goals into leading indicators of success and then use data to diagnose problems and prescribe solutions in order to get to answers that sales managers need to succeed. And then we'll try to apply it to the onboarding use case, and try to be as specific as possible. So some of this is going to get a little dense in the middle and toward the end, but then we'll bring it all back up to a higher level at the end. So that's our agenda. So why are we having the conversation now? Well, the reality is in the last 5 years, sales enablement has emerged as a real significant function across the landscape. 5 years ago, I remember wondering, a lot of people were wondering, where does sales enablement even really fit in? Is it a sales operations function? Is it just a sales training function? What is it? In the last 5 years, it has significantly emerged. This data from CSO Insights, which is actually Miller Heiman data, shows that about 3 years ago, it showed a significant jump in terms of the percentage of companies that have the sales enablement function. And then you really see also from the similar source how, what percentage of these companies have a dedicated sales enablement function. And the bigger the sales force, the more likely it is that you have that dedicated function, which with large sales forces having like three quarters of them having a sales enablement function. So it's really emerged as an important role in the business. And the reason why there's a connection is because the company goals that we all work with, at the top of those company goals are the sales goals. And, these are usually right there at the top when we start every year. And from those sales goals, we generate our quotas. And the sales management is all about then going about hitting those quotas. The sales enablement function is too. And the role of the sales enablement function is to translate those quotas into readiness programs that help fill the gaps that are necessary in order to actually achieve those quotas. So there's tremendous alignment in theory between sales management and sales enablement around achieving those sales quotas and making sure that the sales team has the skills and knowledge that they need. The problem is, and kind of the theme that we're starting with here is that, all right, so how come it doesn't feel that way? And the reality is that the connection breaks down because sales is hard. And often in spite of the best efforts of sales managers and sales enablement teams, failure happens. It's just the nature of sales. Not everybody hits quota.
Alex, will you repeat that first statement? Sales is what?
Hard, difficult.
Yeah. So for people in the back, for those C-level executives who think that, we're just interchangeable and, we're just a commodity.
yeah.
Please, come on, get with the program, folks. Sales is hard.
Yeah.
Hard. So
I'm an MIT guy. That. Yes, that's right. I'm an MIT guy. I have become, and I'm all about data. I have become passionate about the practice of sales as a practice and basically using data and knowledge in order to get better. And the reality is that the time when you need to have this knowledge is when the failure happens. And when that failure happens, that's the moment when sales management and sales enablement need to be the most connected. And usually that's the moment when they become the least connected. And so, and what happens is each of the personas involved kind of have a different perspective in that moment. And the question is, when failure happens, what do you do about it? The sales enablement teams are trying to figure out what's not working. They're trying to figure out, did we have a training course for that? Did the sales rep take the training? The sales rep that's not performing take the training course? And if they did, why didn't it work? The sales manager, meanwhile, is like, what's not working? Is it a skill problem? I was actually at a customer recently, and one of the BDR managers said, if I could just figure out why Joe and Jill, they're doing exactly the same things. Why is Jill succeeding and Joe isn't? If I could just figure that out and then provide the necessary coaching, that would be heaven to me.
I would also say that even sort of deeper than that, there's always an emotion behind this failure, right? Like failure is not emotionless. And unfortunately, as humans, I think we try to look for cause, but somewhere between the thought of cause in our head and our mouth, it changes from cause to blame. And I think that's, to your point, that's where that disconnect happens, is these emotions get in the way because we're humans. And so I love the fact that you're diagnosing each of these things because each person's emotions are real. There's more than one right to this scenario, right? Everybody's right based on their perspective. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward.
Absolutely. And, in the middle of all this is the rep. This is the person whose performance we're working with. And all she wants to do is get better. The rep wants to be number one and the rep wants to hit her goals. And so, when that failure happens, there's nothing but frustration and sometimes blame. So let's get past the blame. And if we can, and be functional about figuring out how we solve the problem. And that's really the essence of strengthening the connection, is if we can figure out a way in that moment, in that worst possible moment, the moment when failure is happening, in order to come up with solutions and diagnose problems, then we will have a path towards success. And it really, in my view, it breaks down the way to make it happen has two parts. Actually, it's one part. The one part is we need a common view. Sales managers need to be able to see what's happening with their teams and their reps so that they're in a position to diagnose problems. Sales enablement needs to be able to see what's happening with teams and reps in order to be able to diagnose problems, not just with the reps, but with their programs so that they can make them better. And there's two elements, and these elements usually live apart in separate silos. The key is to bring them together. And the two elements are the one on the left, which is metrics and KPIs to serve as leading indicators, and the knowledge, and basically on the right-hand side, the skills and knowledge that are required in order to hit those success points along the way. So what I'm going to do is basically share a methodology, which is a methodology for pulling both sides of this equation together into a common view of sales reps that then sales managers and sales enablement people and sales reps can use to diagnose problems early and try to fix them before you get to that end point when it's too late.
I have a question for you. And this is coming from me because I wonder if there's a third silo, right? And that third silo is the unrealistic expectations of executive leadership, right? And sometimes that's even comes from the board, which can then come from the, particularly in the startup world where you started, right? Where I've started, is everybody's not a unicorn as much as they want to be one. Right? I'm sorry, we're all not the next Uber. We're not all the next Brainshark. But that shouldn't mean we shouldn't try. When you see the data that suggests the percentage of salespeople that are missing goals, where is some of the responsibility on executive to kind of have to go back and redefine this stuff? Because I agree with you, the skills and knowledge is required, the metrics and KPIs, but it still feels a little like you're not talking about one of the things, which is unrealistic expectations. And I'm curious how y'all have looked at that higher level before we go into the weeds here.
Yeah, I mean, it does, like I showed a couple slides ago, that the connection between sales management and enablement does start with that company goals, which is that number one sales goal, and the quotas that come from that. There are, I think what kind of gives us all challenges is there are a few companies that put the goal up on the wall, and then they seem to be able to hit it just by walking into work. And then other companies, which is pretty much everybody else, and the vast majority, put up the numbers, and then, like the rest of us, the failure happens. Like, some people hit it, but other people don't. And so the important thing is to be able to put in place this common view so that we actually have a language to speak, which is like you mentioned before, not a blame-based language, but an unemotional language. It's an unemotional language which is based on data and metrics. And it's a combination of the metrics that measure our performance, and the combination of metrics that help us show how we're going to get better with training and coaching. So I'm going to dive down into this now. It starts with the kind of the left-hand side of the equation. We've got our quota goals, but we need to create these leading indicators. The other thing that oftentimes senior managers do, Richard, is they basically only focus on trailing indicators. And trailing indicators are, I get to the end of the quarter, I give the fist bump to the people that hit their number, and I basically, I'm either, I hate to say it, but terminating the people that didn't get there, or I'm putting them on a performance plan. That's no way to build a great team. The way to build a great team is to take those goals and kind of break them into early indicators of success. And in order to do that, you have to work backwards. You take the goals that you want to get to and work backwards. And I'm going to use a specific example. So this is a full cycle outbound AE sales cycle sales process that I've used in the past. I give full credit to a good friend of mine, Adam Clay, who's now the CRO at Logs.io. He was the CRO at Black Duck here in Boston. And this is just a 6-stage process that I've also used, thanks to Adam. And at each stage, there are very important skills that are required to move from stage to stage. Stage 1 is all about diagnosing pain and identifying a sponsor. Stage 2 is I've got a sponsor who's going to move this forward with me, and I've got a mutual action plan, including the need to get to power. Stage 3, I've identified power, signed off on that mutual action plan, which includes the success criteria. Stage 4, the success criteria have been met. and I move on to stage 5 where I'm negotiating, getting through documents. Each of these, it's hard to see, I don't know if you guys can see the bolded terms, but each of these bolded terms are critical skills that need to be developed along this sales in order to be able to successfully execute this sales process.
Yeah, I call these exit criteria, right? Like I've got to have this thing happen beforehand, and in order, to your point, in order to make this, you know, the including need to get to power, I've got to be able to ask the right questions to get to need to get to power, right? So I love this. This is really, really solid.
And getting to power, just an aside on that, getting to power is really hard. It requires asking questions that you just don't want to ask. So the best salespeople do it naturally, but you can learn how to do it. And so what we do with this is we take this and, you know, we do that, what I describe as we work backwards. Okay. So, and what we're doing by working backwards is we're creating those KPIs and metrics, which become the early indicators of success. At the top here, I have the quota number. Like if I only have that, that's that trailing indicator. But I go back from stage to stage, and I basically, if I have metrics for where I am at each stage of the pipeline, from 6 to 5 to 4 and so on. And I have conversion metrics for each stage in terms of how I'm converting opportunities from stage to stage. I get all the way down to stage 1, and then I have to think before I'm even in that process where I have activity metrics like numbers of calls, connect rates for calls, numbers of demo conversions from calls. Same with email type campaigns, email sent, email connect rates, demos set from emails. And then I go all the way back to the very beginning. In this case, I'm describing one where it's primarily a sourced AE, a sourcing AE working outbound. And I'm looking at sourcing the right numbers of leads with the right persona. These KPIs become the early indicators. If I can see all the way back, there's a problem in stage 1 to stage 2, or Richard, like we were saying, like getting to power, it's really hard. That means I got to get from stage 3. I got to get to stage 3. So many companies get to stage 3 and they know once they get to stage 3, and then they have a reliable sales process because they've gotten to power.
So I'm gonna give people a tip because I'm gonna jump in. This is how I teach people to. It's not even about authority, right? It's about access to authority. Can this person get us access? This is the question I teach people to ask all the time. I encourage people to stop asking, you know, who else makes this decision, or who else is involved. I ask the question of who's affected by this decision, because there are lots of people who are affected, and it's a very subtle way to ask, because one of the reasons it works is there's a lot of people that could be affected, and it's a softer question that could eventually get you to the source of power. But interestingly enough, people have a hard time resisting answering that question, as opposed to who else makes the decision, which is kind of like, so what's your budget, right? We've just been so conditioned to it. So that's just a tip for people. Who else is affected by this decision gives you a lot of ways to go around that. So anyway, I'll let you get back to it.
I like that. In fact, I mean, everybody should write it down. I'm writing it down. It's like, because it's a perfect segue to this second part of this methodology, which is to say, once I've got that performance data, then I need to map that performance data to what we call readiness data, which is the skills and knowledge required in order to get from stage to stage. So, you know, if you work backwards, obviously I need closing skills to get to stage 6. I need negotiating skills, and I need to understand the basic legal terms to get to stage 5. I need to be able to manage a proof of concept to get to stage 4. I need to be able to ask the questions that Richard just described in order to be able to get to power. Okay. If I don't know the right questions to ask, I'm never going to get to power. And then I'm going to fool myself that I actually have a power sponsor. And then the deal's going to die in stage 4. Right. And so each of these training mechanisms go all the way back in terms of all the way, you know, let's skip down to the pre-stage 1, where of course I got to learn how to do a cold call. I got to deal with my call technology training. I got to have coaching challenges on a cold call pitch. I got to know how to craft an effective email. I got to know how to use my sales engagement platform in order to be able to run multiple cadences. And then at the very beginning, I need to train on persona. So each of the success criteria maps very clearly to skills and knowledge. And you can do this with your, I mean, like, this isn't, anybody can do this with their sales process for all of their sales members and do the similar mapping. The trick then is to get it into a holistic view. How do I get these things so that they actually map together? and just pull that and pull that performance data and that readiness together into this holistic view. Because now I'm bringing data from my CRM, I'm bringing data from my readiness platform, and I want to be able to have my sales managers and my sales enablement people and my sales reps see what's going on in order to be able to figure out the problem when the failure happens. And what most people do is they build a crap ton of dashboards. And my big advice is more data is not better. More data can just, basically turn your sales managers off. Like I've had multiple different partners and customers that I've worked with when they're talking about data that they've even created from a monster spreadsheet or from a business intelligence tool. And they say, I just can't put this in, it's helpful to me, but I just can't put this in front of my rep. Or an enablement team member or an operations team member has a lot of data, but they're like, our managers can't use this in a one-on-one. So what we recommend is we recommend scorecards. Scorecards are different than dashboards, and this is like something that people are sick of me hearing me say, but maybe the folks in this audience for them it's the first time. But dashboards just visualize data, whereas scorecards put data into a coachable context. That's important because sales managers need to be able to use this like in a one-on-one or on the sales floor with a sales rep. And the coachable context that I'm talking about really boils down to these three things. It's comparing their reps to their peers, comparing the reps to their goals, and then tracking it over time so that you can have accountability.
So talk to me, I have a question.
Yeah.
I agree with comparison to peers from a competitive ranking. People, salespeople like to see themselves up there. I do get concerned sometimes, though, that if you focus too much on comparison to peers, you drive to the middle, right? You don't drive towards the best because, and so I do get cautious of that. So how do you compare to peers in a healthy way as you look at this from a data perspective, right? Because it's easy to do it and throw it up on a dashboard, but then you got to manage to it. It's one thing to show the data; it's another thing to talk about it.
Yeah, the peer comparison is really, really valuable because you pointed out one of the big reasons. One is just motivating. No rep wants to show up in the red. And we're talking about I just want to know, I'm setting this certain number of demos. Where do I stand relative to my peers? I don't want to be in the red. I want to be a top rep. And so, I do believe that motivates. And by the way, that's hugely important for a manager. For a manager to be able to say, hey, you're struggling with, let's just use the same example we've been using. You're struggling with getting to deals at stage 4 or stage 3. Your conversion rate is bad. That means you're struggling with getting to power. It's showing up in red. We gotta improve you there. And a rep who sees that says, yeah, I want to be where the top reps are. How do I get there?
My question would be, and maybe it's both, right? And it depends, right? In a traditional consulting way, it's one thing to compare against, demo set or demo completed, but it's also another thing to go demos that converted, right? So if I only set 10 demos a month, but 7 of them convert, and someone else sets 20 a month and only 4 of them convert, that's not necessarily bad in either case, right? Like the 20 demos hopefully could learn into something long tail, but there's value there. So when you talk about this peer-to-peer, are you looking more at the conversion? Are you looking at the raw data, or it depends, Richard?
Well, we look at the whole picture. So, it's when you have the whole view of of that entire process that I described, you're able to see, you're able to, what you're trying to do is diagnose. So you're looking for places that are weak, relative, that prevent the person from getting to that end goal. So if the person is getting to a higher demo number relative to their peers, but their activity, for example, their call activity numbers are lower than their peers, then this is the moment where you can actually say that sales rep actually might be right when they say, hey, I'm efficient. Whereas in the old approach, in the absence of data, if that sales rep was low in call volume, the sales manager has nothing to do but just say, increase your calls. But the rep says, but I'm getting more out of my calls, right? So, and then we've had customers, and our biggest customer for Scorecards is Zoom Video, and they have succeeded. They've performed so well that they don't want to compare their reps. They don't want to compare their reps to goals. They want to compare their reps to each other, because they always want to be pushing. They don't know what their capabilities are, because they can be higher than what their goals are because they're growing so fast. So this method works across a variety of scenarios, and it really enables all those three personas that I described before to kind of have a totally different perspective now, and collaborate in the moment when things aren't working. So now the sales enablement person is able to look at a place where there's a problem and say, okay, we got a problem there. Do I have, or have I created the courses that are necessary, or are the courses that I've created just ineffective? In some cases, maybe I haven't even created, maybe I haven't created a Get to Power, ask the right questions for Getting to Power video training course yet. I got to create that. I have a total gap. And in other cases, I've created the program, but my reps aren't getting there. So let me improve it, and let me track it again the next time and see if I'm actually improving. This is the kind of thing that now that sales enablement person is able to diagnose. And for the sales manager, they're not, the sales manager now is in the same position. They're also able to diagnose. They're able to motivate that improvement that we just talked about. They're actually able to take specific action, saying, you need to take the Get to Power training. And then if it works, or it doesn't work, I'm holding the rep accountable over time. And then the sales rep, again, at the end of the day, we're trying to help the sales rep be successful, and helping motivate them by showing them how they stack up, showing them what they need to improve, and then giving them clear direction. I mean, it just doesn't help a sales rep if we don't give them clear direction, or just say, like, do more volume. We need to kind of give them clear idea of what they need to do in order to improve. So that's the methodology, and kind of applied it to an example, but I thought it would be helpful to kind of take another example and say, let's use this onboarding use case. And the reason is that onboarding just has a big payoff. Just pulling a couple data points from the industry, Forrester's data shows that it can improve ramp time by up to 24% if you have good training programs. The Sales Management Association showed that it's about a year on average to train reps. I know it's a broad range, but when you take roughly 25% of about a year, you're talking about, improving performance by a quarter. And if you can do that with a ramp up period, the impact on the bottom line is significant. So, onboarding is just a great use case to talk about. The hypothetical that I'll use is a little bit simpler than that full cycle salesperson. I'll use it's not easier. It's just simpler because it has fewer stages. But just taking a BDR and an onboarding program for a BDR, where the goal for the BDR is to generate a certain number of qualified demos for their AEs. And I'm going to use the example where the BDR has inbound leads. And there's three primary stages. The first one is the prospecting call, which is the ability for the BDR to basically make the call, make the pitch, overcome objections, and get to a discovery call. Getting to the discovery call then has a whole new set of skills, because the discovery call is one where the BDR is actually trying to identify pain, and they're doing the first stage of assessing whether or not there's a sponsor that can carry this forward. That then represents a qualified demo to be handed to an AE, where they actually have a person who is a sponsor in a that has an identified pain. So that's the example.
Can you go back? That's a great example. Can you repeat that though, just for people? I just want to make sure people heard it well.
Yeah, let me repeat it with the next picture. So it basically says, this is the process that I'm talking about, where the BDR receives inbound leads, has a bunch of activity metrics, both in calling and emailing, that they have to do once they have those inbound leads. And I'm defining a prospecting call as the skills necessary to get to a prospecting call as the skills necessary in order to make a pitch and to overcome objections. Oftentimes they're product-related objections or competitive-related objections. or I just don't want to do anything related objections. And then get to a discovery call. The discovery call is the call where I've got the person online for a little bit longer time, and I'm able to assess, do they have pain? And then secondly, is this person a sponsor? Because a sponsor is someone who can carry this forward in a sales process. It might not, the sponsor might not be a power sponsor, but I just want to know that the sponsor is a sponsor who is willing
So
to.
I actually have some. This is great because this is something I teach also, and I'll give everybody my one-liner golden nugget. But how do you teach reps what to say there? How do you determine whether or not this person is a sponsor, a power sponsor, a champion, a cheerleader, whatever you want to call it? How have you guys taught your team to do that?
Usually we quickly identify a sponsor or whether or not you have a sponsor by their willingness to, maybe this is circular, but by their willingness to get you to power.
Right. So here's how I teach people to do this, right? And you can do this before proposals, you can do this before demos, you can do this before sending out a bunch of stuff, right? But let's talk about the demo because that's what you brought up, is that I love to get sales reps to say, hey, look, Alex, look, I'm going to show you a demo. I know we're going to set a demo for next week, but if this demo doesn't go well, right, if you don't like what I show you in Brainshark, I'm never hearing from you. So let's assume this demo is going to go well because I know that it better. What happens next after I show you the demo?
Right.
I call it pre-qualifying the demo. So asking before you start the demo or before you schedule the demo, what happens after that gives you a little bit more visibility into where you are with this person, where they are with this process, right? Other hoops you may have to jump through. So anyway, whenever you bring up stuff, I love to give people some tactical advice. I'll shut up again.
No, I love the tech. I always write that. I've learned that collecting questions is the key. And knowing when to use the questions is pretty much what you want to train for. So there's nothing more money than getting the good questions. So that's really good stuff. So, so when you take this process, this is what the BDR has to get through. So it's a little less complicated than a full cycle sales process for an AE, but it's still a lot that has to happen here. And the first step is to work backwards to create the leading indicators of success. I didn't do this upside down in this case, but the KPIs and metrics start with dealing with those inbound leads and the calling and emailing activities. Lead response time is a critical metric. Being able to, am I actually getting that inbound lead and responding according to kind of whatever my target is? These days, that target, especially in transactional business, can be like 5 or 10 minutes or better. Am I making the necessary number of calls per leads? There's tons of best practices for the number of calls. Everyone should have goals for that. Number of emails per lead. And then I want to look at things like conversion rates from leads to prospecting calls. I want to look at, because this is an onboarding program, I also want to track how quickly am I able to get my BDR trainees to the time when they're making that first prospecting call. Now, once they're at the prospecting call, I got to look at the conversion rate from prospecting calls to discovery calls. And I also want to look at how quickly I can get my reps ramped up to that. So time to first discovery call, and then conversion rates from discovery calls to qualified demos and time to get there. That then just tees up my KPIs. As we talked about, that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation then is mapping that readiness data, mapping it to readiness data and to the onboarding timeline that I'm trying to do. So the first set maps very clearly to some critical skills that need to be trained. One is for BDR, for many of them, it's the first time they've ever used a CRM. I got to teach them how to use a CRM. I got to teach them what a persona is, who the target persona is, and how to use tools in order to research that. The tools like SalesNav and ZoomInfo and so forth. I got to teach them how to craft an effective email cadence. I got to teach them how to use a sales engagement tool to get to that prospecting call, to get any prospecting call to actually work. I got to train them on cold calling, on product pitch, on overcoming objections. And the number of objections can be very, very large. So that's a significant amount of skill that needs to be developed. And then to get to that demo, this is where we're now getting this is fairly sophisticated, discovering pain. qualifying a sponsor. Richard's question about qualifying the sponsor, like, okay, I'm going to get this demo set up. Now, what is this, what's next after that? Another question that I often use on this is, we're going to get this demo set up, but like, just help me understand, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where is this in your priority scale? So things that help kind of assess, do I really have someone who's going to carry this forward? And is it a priority? Because, I could tee this up for my AE, but my AE is going to be really mad at me if I tee this up for her. And then she comes back to me and says, this person wasn't a sponsor. This person was low priority. So
I want to jump in here real quick too. And I want to remind people that, these questions that you're bringing up and the ones I'm bringing up, sometimes, as you said earlier, the very beginning, is sometimes these feel uncomfortable, right? To ask, because we feel like we're prying too much. And I just want to talk about mindset for a second, because it's super important, which is that, look, you got about 5 or 6 things that are your best commodities, right? You've got setting up a meeting with an AE, you've got giving out pricing, you've got sending a proposal, you've got running a demo, you've got sending a deck, you've got all kinds of things that are really important. And if people are asking you for those things, right, if you're at that stage, respectfully, you've earned the right to ask the kinds of questions Alex and I are talking about. Because I know a lot of times there's fear. There's like, oh my God, I don't want to offend somebody, I don't want to lose the deal. Right? If someone gets offended by what happens next or the question that Alex is talking about, there probably wasn't a real deal there. And if they're asking for that, you've earned the right to ask something back professionally, politely. So I wanted to just pause and remind people of that, because I think mindset's really important. Again, I'll stop here and give it back to you, Alex.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so, and I should say one more thing before I move on from this slide is, remember, this is an onboarding program. So I'm setting a expectation for a timeline. And, just, it could be anything, but like in a good kind of agile onboarding training program, you have key time metrics that you're trying to set for getting to first prospect call, getting to discovery call, getting to qualified demo. It's agile in the sense that you're not trying to boil the ocean. You're trying to build these skills up incrementally to the point where the BDR is functioning. But I'm not, again, from our original whole premise here, I'm expecting failure, because that's what happens always. So I've now got the way of saying where in this process earlier, before the BDR gets to that 3-month or 6-month stage, where have I been able to identify points of failure? And then what are the skills and knowledge that might be the cause of that point of failure? And that allows me, when I put all that in a common view, that allows each of our same personas again to kind of productively solve the problem. So the sales enablement, and this is again, this is where sales enablement also builds a ton of credibility with sales management, because now we're in this moment where it's not working and we can answer these questions that really help. Sales enablement person is basically able to say, okay, are they completing the programs in the timeline that I set, and are they doing okay? But more importantly than that, is it actually translating into performance? They may be completing all my courses, but if they aren't getting there in the timeline in terms of prospecting calls or qualified demos or qualification calls, then I'm not doing something right. Okay. And it could be that my programs have a gap, or it could be that my programs just aren't good enough. And so the sales enablement person is not in any kind of position to say, hey, not my problem. In fact, the sales enablement person is right there with the sales manager saying, this is my problem. The sales manager is able to see early who's falling behind. So that BDR manager that I mentioned at one of my customers before was able to now say, okay, who's falling behind? And what is the gap? They clearly are missing something in this process. It could be something that we talked about just now. Okay, they're getting all the way through the process, but not getting to qualified demos. They're not asking those hard questions. The hardest questions are really figuring out if I have a sponsor and figuring out if I have a pain. And then the sales rep is the beneficiary here, because the sales manager now is in the position to point him or her to the right sales training or coaching, help them see if they're on track, see how they stack up relative to their peers, and really motivate them to kind of get better. Oftentimes people go through, if I'm a BDR, I go through a training program because I feel like I just got to go through the training program. But if in the midst of my training program, actually see what's happening and whether I'm tracking or not tracking, I'm much more motivated to kind of pay more attention to that training than I might otherwise have been. And then the question here is like, how do we actually put all this in action? And it's so hard, but it's so simple. And it's all about that weekly one-on-one. That weekly one-on-one is in many cases a wasted moment. Businesses know that they need to do it.
Say it louder. Say it louder. It's say it.
Yeah, it's
oh my God, please.
It's a wasted moment. You say it, you set it up on your Mondays and Tuesdays or whatever day of the week that you do your one-on-ones. You sit and you do your one-on-ones. And oftentimes it can be as bad as, a rep comes into the sales manager in the onboarding process and the manager doesn't really know how they're doing, but they seem to be doing the activities. So they give them the fist bump and they say, keep it up, bro. Other times it's like, well, you're not hitting your numbers, but the sales manager doesn't really have any way of diagnosing the problem. So with this approach, we're actually able to enable diagnosis, and we're able to do it in a standardized way because everybody's using the same kind of methodology so that all of your sales managers are showing up on their Mondays and Tuesdays, seeing which KPIs are there and which KPIs are not, and then being able to map that to what training and coaching needs to happen. For businesses that are 5 people, this matters because you're going from just having a sales VP who's doing all the one-on-ones themselves, who's probably really good, to now suddenly hiring a sales manager or 2, and now you have to scale that. And it applies to businesses with hundreds of salespeople, because especially for them, you're taking your best sales reps and turning them into managers and suddenly expect them to train up your reps, onboard your reps, and get them to productivity. So that one-on-one is the key moment for all of this.
I'm going to jump in on this, right? So first of all, if you're doing one-on-ones and all you're talking about is pipeline, that's not a one-on-one, that's a pipeline meeting, right? Yeah. One-on-ones are about career advancement. They're about professional development. And to your point, hey, what's the one thing, if we look at the metrics, what's one thing we could implement this week to change that metric, right? Sometimes it's an increase in some activity or a decrease in another. Both can be positive. And that's what the one-on-ones are. And I know the challenge is that most managers, as you know probably, is that we all got promoted because we were content experts. We were not people experts. Nobody taught me how to manage anybody in sales management. It was like, oh, great, you hit your number enough, go do it. You like to help onboard the new people, now you can be in management, right? Like that was the job requirement. So it gets lost. So these one-on-ones are about professional development, career development, not pipeline meetings, not metrics, not KPIs. You can talk about them in relevance to the professional development, but please make sure that you understand it's not a pipeline meeting. So again, I'll stop.
That's right. You have to make the connection between those KPIs and with the skills and knowledge that you need in order to build the skill. And so just now to kind of translate that, I kind of wrap it up. And then I think we'll have a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. This strengthening the connection, at Brainshark, we describe it as kind of the connection between readiness and revenue, between sales management and sales readiness. And Brainshark has been basically all about answering this question, are they ready? Which is really the readiness side of this equation. With the suite of solutions that the sales readiness market is now known for, around making sure that they have the content they need. Are they learning the courses and the training? Are they mastering the knowledge with coaching? And this missing piece that we've added in this conversation to really bring it together is, the ability to ask that other question, which is is it working question. And like I said, our advice, and this is kind of where I come from as a data geek, is, using scorecards to do that, actually turning, this into as much a science as it is an art, and recognizing that this is a skill that can be developed. And so I look at the correlation between skills and competencies, and give reps visibility to them so they can see what they need to do in order to improve. And then this word diagnose, this takes the emotion out of it. Like, I love Richard, that he brought up this notion of emotion and blame. Let's take that out. Let's give a common language, which is data. Let's diagnose and then prescribe. And so when we prescribe, what we're prescribing, and those one-on-ones, as you just pointed out, is we're prescribing career development. Like, what I'm telling you is how you're going to get better in a week, and in 3 months, and in 6 months, and this is how you're going to turn it into a career. If you don't develop these skills, it's not a career. You're just doing a job for a while, and then you're going to switch to some other career. But if you want to be someone who like performs in this art and skill, then you need to build these skills. And then all of this applies in multiple use cases. So we talked about onboarding, but it applies across so many. Efficient onboarding is critical. It has a clear value proposition, improving your outreach and prospecting, cross-sell, upsell, pipeline building. One of the biggest ones is launching a new product. So if I'm bringing a new product to market, so many times we bring a new product to market through a sales team. The product is given to the sales team with the best intentions, and then the sales team just can't sell it. And then blame goes everywhere, as Richard pointed out. But like the key here is let's get rid of the blame. Let's look for the ability to let's set up the KPIs that show the progress. Let's set up the skills and knowledge that need to be done in order to achieve it. Let's create scorecards that provide visibility, and then we're able to actually succeed as a team. So
just keep in mind, I'm just saying don't blame the sales team. I'm saying blame everybody else. Just kidding.
Yeah. And so anyways, just the last slide, at the end of the day, let's just all recognize, that sales is hard. Failure happens. And the sales enablement function is there. It's important. And we have an opportunity to kind of elevate the sales enablement function so that it can help sales managers at the moment when they need the help the most, which is in that moment when things aren't working. And the key is to be able to diagnose the problems early. And if you can diagnose the problems early with a combination of performance data and readiness data, then everyone succeeds. And the impact here is on greater quota achievement, which obviously is our shared goal from the beginning. So that's it. That's the last slide we have.
So there's a couple things I want to sort of chime in here too, because I love what Brainshark does. A friend of mine said this the other day, and he says, particularly with what's going on in the world today, the beautiful thing about being in sales is we don't have to worry about job security quite so much. What we have to worry about is employment security. If we're good in sales, we can get employed, right? Like that's a good thing. And so having the ability now that we have these days with things like Zoom and Brainshark and all these great platforms is that we can do that for ourselves and for each other. And I think that's a really important message, that we've got that, is to focus on your employment security. That will actually help reduce some of the stress we're feeling, and Brainshark is an awesome tool to help us do that. I know we got one question from the chat, which is everything coming out with the scorecard template? Do you offer a free scorecard template, Alex? Do you have something that, even if it's just like a Google Doc or something to sort of show that? Is there someplace they can get that kind of a resource from you guys?
We certainly have in the past provided basically spreadsheet-based scorecard templates. And so if whoever asked the question kind of has an email address, we can follow up with that. I can't remember if that's still aligned. My company, Reckoner, was recently acquired by Brainshark. And so making those, we have in the past made scorecard templates available to folks, and always happy to share them. We obviously
you just shared it. So,
okay.
Allie, thanks for asking the question.
Yeah.
Alex, how can people get in touch with you, right? Like if they do want to know more about, hey, look, everybody, go connect with Alex on LinkedIn. I think we know that. Tell him you want a scorecard, and guess what will happen? Brainshark will probably put together a scorecard to send everybody. I put you on the spot, Alex, but sorry.
No, that's cool.
I know it's something you want anyway.
No, here's all my contact information except my email address is spelled wrong. Oh well. It's A Laats with 2 A's, not 2 T's, at brainshark.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm passionate about the subject matter. I write about it a lot. There's a ton of stuff on our blog that the Brainshark team has written and that I've sometimes written, and happy to kind of geek out on this stuff anytime.
Yeah, we have another question coming from the audience before you hang up and before others run away, although we know you might have to. Hey, knowing the sales processes are different per solution, how do you maintain the same level of integrity in the process with people working from home? Great question given today's environment, right?
Yeah, I think it's a function of you have to actually be really diligent about your process and to mean it. When you're a sales manager and you're sitting with a rep and you're talking about moving in your one-on-one, you're talking about deals moving from a stage 2 to a stage 3. You have to have the same set of questions to ask. How do you know this is power? What is your mutual action plan? What is the priority? If you can do those as a manager, you can ask those questions face to face or remotely. And the one thing that I would say that most that you should always do in these contexts is to use some form of tool, whether it's a Google Docs or it's a Microsoft OneDrive or whatever it is, whatever shared document you have, keep a standing record of the questions that you ask week over week, so that you're always able to kind of go back and visit them in following weeks. That's the way you maintain accountability. But all of that can be done remotely or in the office. There shouldn't be anything that holds you back when you're.
Yeah, I would add a different level of integrity, because I agree with you on that. But there's also integrity in the one-on-one, particularly now that people are remote. Internally at your organization, in the simplest ways, all one-on-ones could be done on the same day so people don't get interrupted. But don't change those. Just because the CEO picks up the phone and says, hey, can you talk right now? You have to tell your CEO, no, I got to do my one-on-one with my rep who's remote. That's real integrity, because nothing is better. Data's great, but nothing's better than that one-on-one time. And for someone who's working from home and they're not used to working from home, to think that, okay, I get to talk to my manager, maybe I don't even know what I'm going to talk about, but maybe that human interaction is just important. So please be diligent, if not militant, about sticking to your one-on-ones with your team. Don't worry about over-communicating. Guess what? Your team will tell you if you're over-communicating. Tell your team you want to over-communicate, because you know they are working from home. But don't let people change that stuff. So maintain integrity in the process as much as you do the questions.
Yeah. So if your process, I agree 100%. If your process is like a team stand-up, do it remote.
Do it remote, absolutely.
We did a daily stand-up of our sales team with Reckoner before that Brainshark acquisition, and if you have it, do it. Brainshark's teams are doing daily stand-ups now. It's one of the things that has been added to stand-ups in the sales organization. Used to be, I think, twice per week. Now it's daily, and that's great. That's really important. And the one-on-ones are hyper. Richard, you made the point.
A couple more questions are coming in. How do you feel about Gong and Chorus and Exec Vision and all those things? Do they integrate with you guys somehow, or just in theory? What do you think?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of all the technology that enables conversational intelligence tools like Gong and Chorus and Exec Vision. I actually had a startup, I don't know, like 15 years ago, that did that for large call centers. It was called Evoke, with some and the
just ahead of your time, man. Like most of my grads, we're just ahead of your time, dude.
Yeah, no, it was a real business even back then. But the reality is, yes, all of the data that is generated from those solutions is wonderful data to integrate in alongside this. I mean, even simple stuff that is like a simple data point like talk times. So if I can see alongside my CRM data and my training data, I can see talk time data. Your talk times are too long. You're not listening to the customer. That's beautiful data. And it's such a simple data point, but it's such a useful data point. And so those kind of things can be pulled. Sometimes you have a business which is so key, like you have a sales process which is so tuned in that you have keywords that must be said in order to, at different stages, or you have keywords that must be avoided. Those are also valuable elements to integrate in here, so that if your calls are showing you're using this keyword and this is critical, great job, you're moving things forward as a result, or you're not using this keyword, let's use it. That's a good way to test the kind of key questions also. Like, are you asking the right questions? Are you using
I also think too, we didn't even talk about this, but I could easily see Brainshark around the competitor story, right? Like if you're using a tool like Gong Course or Exec Vision and you hear the competitor names come up, well, what's that training like on around that competitor, and what do we have built in? What do we need to get back to the enablement team to make sure we're talking about the right things, right? So I think that's a great one. Yeah. Another question coming up. How do you break out the different one-on-one activity, one-on-ones, deal coaching, pipeline meetings, sales team meetings. You're right. Like we can now get overwhelmed with so many freaking meetings, particularly because we're not in the office and able to have those little one-on-one sort of sidebars, right? I certainly have some ideas, but Alex, how do you see that as a leader, and what do you see your sales team doing?
Yeah, I think that one of the things, there's multiple levels of that. I do think that it's really important to maintain the regular cadence of meetings that you had beforehand, and in some cases increasing them, because especially salespeople, they thrive off of one another, and so if you, like we're doing, we're maintaining all the regular meetings. Colleen Honan, our chief sales officer, is fabulous at that. She's also instituted this daily stand-up process, which I think is also helping people stay connected. I think that these days, creating Slack, this is maybe still going to sound so obvious, but creating Slack channels or other chat channels that allow for the equivalent of that, like stop by your desk or stop by your cube or stop by your station kind of conversations. And then also
office hours, like old school office hours.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and just always keep a random channel, because the random channel is necessary for us to connect as humans. In Boston, Tom Brady just said that he's out. So having a random channel in Slack where people can commiserate or be excited, whatever it may be, is a good thing to have. It keeps that connection.
Isn't Brainshark building a channel for that? Like, aren't you going to onboard the new quarterback, right? Like, they've got all their plays and their playbook in the Brainshark, right? Like, isn't that the goal?
Shouldn't they be? I know.
So the other thing I would come back to Chad's question on this. Chad is the gentleman who asked this question. Is not everything has to be done every week, right? You do have to look at your own deal cycle, the size of your deals. It's possible you could do pipeline meetings every other week. It's possible certain AEs only need a pipeline meeting every other week. Your newbies might need it every week. So I think that the question is to try something, put something together. And this is the other thing, because I'm actually having to do this with my kids, right? So I'm having to homeschool my kids right now with everything that's going on. We actually asked them, what order do you want to do your stuff this week? Having them involved in setting the schedule helps, right? It also helps in sales and sales leadership. I've done it all the time. Like, hey, we need to have these meetings. Here's what I think everybody should do and when I think we should do them. What works for you, right? Maybe somebody is working from home like me and they actually have a kid. And so at a certain time that you want to do that one-on-one, it's just not going to work for them right now. So be flexible. So ask them what's going to be helpful for them to make their day easier, to make their week easier, to hit their month, and engage them in that process is super, super important, right? I say this all the time before I talk to people, CROs and CSOs, and they're like, hey, Richard, we want you to come do training. And I'm like, yeah, let me talk to a couple of your reps. But why don't you let them give me the sniff test? Because now all of a sudden the leadership looks like, hey, we're not just going to dictate this to you. And I think that's really important right now for the managers who are listening, that engage your team in a way that encourages them to be a part of it and not just dictate it to them just because you should. With that, we don't have any more questions coming in, and a lot of people have hung around for a little bit. We're right up on time. So Alex, thank you very much for joining us. And it's Alex Laats is how you pronounce it. Mm-hmm. And we really appreciate Brainshark coming on board, being a part of Sales Hacker, being a part of the webinar, and particularly at this time, giving some direction in this time of oh shit, what do we do right now kind of stuff. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was a fun conversation. That was great.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for letting me interject. Thanks, everybody.